You wish to serve the great houses as truthsayers and shape the flow of power. You must first exert power over yourself. Your mind and body must be within your control. Only then can you discern the truth.
Welcome to the official Dune Prophecy Podcast. I'm Ahmed Ali-Akbar.
And I'm Greta Johnson. On this show, we are unpacking every episode of the new HBO original series, Dune Prophecy, with the show's writers, cast, and crew.
Today, we've got some special guests to help us dig into the premiere episode. First up, we have showrunner, writer, and executive producer Alison Schapker and executive producer and writer Jordan Goldberg.
Then later, we are joined by Emily Watson, who plays the mysterious sister at the heart of this new story, Valia Harkonnen.
All right, folks, be warned, there are spoilers ahead for the first episode of Dune Prophecy, so go watch that first, and I'm going to use the voice here.
Come back to us.
What holds more truth? History or prophecy?
Okay, so much happens in this first episode. We are not wasting any time, and neither is the sisterhood. Should we get into it?
Yeah, let's do it. So we have Mother Superior Valia and Sister Tula. They're preparing to welcome Princess Inez to the sisterhood. They've been working in secret for years to orchestrate a royal wedding and get Princess Inez on the throne so they can control the entire Imperium. But things are not really going as planned. On Seleucus Secundus, the home planet of Emperor Carino, the royal marriage falls apart after a mysterious soldier from Arrakis named Desmond Hart shows up and murders both the young groom-to-be and Kasha, a member of the sisterhood assigned to House Carino.
This leaves us with a great many questions, especially who the heck is Desmond Hart, and is a reckoning coming?
So, Greta, we both watched the episode for the first time last night, and they've done a really good job here of not overwhelming you, but you do have to pay attention. It asks you to pay attention.
Yes.
It rewards a close listen and watch. And I'm excited to see more of that with what they've set up here.
So it seems to me the main thread of this episode, in addition to just like general sisterhood drama, is this marriage that seems to have really fallen apart by the end of this episode.
For a lot of reasons, namely Desmond Hart from Arrakis.
I was not expecting that at all. Were you?
No, I was like, he seems kind of, like roguish, but not like murdering two people on two different planets. He kills the groom-to-be and Kasha, who was a member of the sisterhood, who was really close to the Imperium. They die in two separate places. And so there's a lot of questions.
I mean, Kasha was seeing a lot of issues with this whole situation.
True.
Like, she knew that things were not going the way they should, which also I think is pretty interesting just in terms of like, the Mother Superior, the people in charge thought this was a great idea and like kept double checking that even.
Yeah.
Well, and we also just saw that idea of sifting truth from lies. We saw that in the training session at the school. It's very clear that that is, at this point, arguably one of their most important roles, the sisterhood, being the person to determine whether people are telling the truth to the people in power.
Yeah, I mean, we see that it's not infallible either. They make sure to demonstrate that, they can't necessarily specifically say which parts of the truth are fully true and which parts of the lies are fully lies. You know what I mean? Which is a really interesting way to think about politics as well, right? Like, that's what politics is all about, right? Like putting a little bit of lie on the truth, putting a little bit of truth on the lie, so that you can get your way.
Whew. That's real. Yeah.
And Valia is our kind of way in, I would say. And she is somebody who's getting questioned a lot, but has a very strong sense of what she wants. She commands a room when she walks in, Valia. She really...
well, and speaking of being commanding, 30 years before the action of the main series, she uses the voice for the first time and is literally very commanding.
I think one of my major takeaways that I love about Dune is the idea of the voice being a thing that can actually change history. Meaning a person's speech, a person's like charisma, a person's ability to manipulate can literally change the course of history. And that's what happens in that first scene you're describing. First time the voice is used, it actually changes the course of history for the sisterhood.
Now, each episode, we are going to have a segment that we are calling Beyond the Veil, and we are going to dive deeper into the episode with some truth sayers from the show. Today, we have showrunner, writer, and executive producer Allison Schapker back with us, and executive producer and writer Jordan Goldberg here for the first time. So let's get into it and go beyond the veil. Welcome to the podcast, Jordan Goldberg and Allison Schapker. We are very happy to have you here.
So this is exciting because we now get to talk about the first episode. The first time we talked to Allison, there were no spoilers. Now we are getting into spoiler territory. So that's very exciting for us. But, let's do a little bit of background first, Jordan. We heard Allison's Dune origin story in our last episode. But what about you? What was your relationship like with Dune prior to the show?
My gateway to Dune was actually the video game, which I think was titled Dune 2. It came out on the PCs, 1992. And that game is very cool because it teaches you kind of all the rules and what there are and all the stakes of what it's like to be on Arrakis. You're like mining spice. It's a strategy game. You're ordering off attacks against the Harkonnens. And I think actually was a very influential game. I think it was like one of its first of its kind. So I played that game and I got really interested in Dune. And I remember going back and watching the movie again, and then the 1984 movie, and that just really captured my imagination.
In case you can't tell from my face, you're kind of blowing my mind because somehow I was like a big PC gamer around that time, and I feel like I maybe played that before I knew Dune, the book, and never put it together. I have to look up footage of
it. Would take your life away too, because you constantly would mine spice all the time. You know what I mean?
Of course, you gotta be mining spice.
Yeah.
I gotta look that up after
That's
this.
delightful. So I would love to hear how you two sort of figured out the flow of working together.
Well, Jordan and I worked together on Westworld season 4. And I mean, that was its own epic adventure. And, I had the pleasure of really working side by side with Jordan through all aspects of the season. And when I was in a position to tap a comrade to come over and help me with Dune, Jordan was the first person I called.
Yeah, I got lucky to work with Allison. I mean, Allison, it struck me because, the thing about Westworld, which is really kind of nice, and it was really nice education into going into this series, was that it's a lot about the details. It's a lot of world building. And I remember very early on, it was when we were in the 1920s park, the Noir Park. Remember, we were trying various different guns on people and stuff. And I was like, wow, Allison's really into the details. This is not. But I was respected it because that's what it takes to be like a real world builder. You got to be able to kind of go through all those motions. And that continued when Allison and I worked in post together. She really got into the minutia things. And that's about respecting the IP. So when I heard she was doing Dune, I was like, well, they found the right person to do that because she's going to take that very seriously. And when she called me about Dune, I was like, wow. I mean, the idea of doing it as a television show is just really, really, it seems extremely challenging, but really kind of intriguing.
So I think we should get into the show since you're talking about how exciting it is to create the TV show. Our first episode is called The Hidden Hand.
I want to talk about that opening sequence in voiceover.
When humans rose up against the thinking machines that had enslaved them, history says it was an Atreides who led them to victory, while my great-grandfather deserted the fight. When war ended and all thinking machine technology was banned, history branded my family as cowards, and so we were banished to a desolate world.
What were you trying to accomplish, and why did we go right into this narration?
I think there was a real feeling, and I mean, this was part of threading that needle where you wanted Dune fans to come on board, but also open up a space for people who maybe are not as familiar with the basic premise of the world. And it felt important to us to take people's hand through our main character to just set the stakes a bit of where we were in time, and that this was going to be her story that we were telling.
Yeah, and I think that's right. I think what I really liked about it wasn't just about setting up the kind of context of the story, but it also sort of introduced the wound that this character had without kind of going into a lot of details. But, I mean, this is not only who becomes the second Mother Superior of the Sisterhood, but it's also someone who is a Harkonnen and tells you from the get-go that what we thought has happened to the Harkonnens is not really the truth. You know, she's caught between this idea that, you know, she has lived through a point where like history is not the truth. So, you know, is she going to end up in a world where prophecy becomes her truth? And that's just a very interesting idea, I think. And so it's a trifecta. It's doing a lot of stuff there.
I think it really comes through, and it's really interesting to think about like the tricky balance, especially in the first couple minutes of a new show like this, where like you don't want to go too exposition heavy, but you need to explain enough. You do need to establish the stakes. I think it's just like, yes, a difficult needle to thread, and y'all did a great job with it. It's interesting to think about one of the big themes of this show being that idea of sifting truth from lies, since that's what obviously one of the things that like the sisterhood is so good at doing. But it does make me wonder how much, given the fact that history can be so subjective, like how much can we trust Valia's version?
Well, exactly, because, you know, she's also telling a story. So
Right?
she's telling you that the story of history written by the Atreides is not
Yeah.
what it seems. But at the same time, of course, it wouldn't be Dune if we didn't ask ourselves, well, where is Valia's perspective rooted?
Yeah, I mean, it feels like a confession, but maybe you'll get a sense that it's more of a rationale, if you get my drift.
I like that.
I like that a lot.
Mm.
So in this opening, we learn about the first Mother Superior, Rakella. Valia calls her True Mother. What was Rakella's role in the Great Machine Wars?
She founds the sisterhood sort of after the machine wars. I mean, she was a doctor. She was a scientist. In our opening, you see her on the battlefield almost in a medic kind of role, you know, attending to the wounded. And she saw a great deal of suffering. But what happens to her after that is she actually is poisoned, and she has a near-death experience. And she exerts in that moment of crisis such incredible control over her body on a cellular level. She actually synthesizes an antidote to the poison she's been given from chemicals in her own cells. And that has this sort of side effect that not only does she live, but she unlocks her genetic memory, which is key to the sisterhood, and connects to the wisdom of all her female ancestors. And that's what Jordan, when he referred to other memory, this notion that suddenly the wisdom of generations and the pain of generations was accessible to her. And it helps her kind of see her purpose going forward, which is that the Imperium will need to be guided by wisdom on that deep a level if it's going to stand a chance. And for her to do that will mean somehow taking this skill that was born out of crisis for her and passing it on to other women. And so she gathers women around her, and it begins to form this order that will dedicate itself to guiding the future, but also will be recruiting women because it turns out genetic memory is passed down through the maternal line of generations in the body in our Dune lore. So that's part of why it grows up to be an all-female order. And we're going to see in future episodes a little bit what that means to young women who come to the sisterhood and are asked to train to do the same thing Rakella did under great duress.
I love that there's sort of like a mitochondria implication to all of it. That's really cool.
Yeah, I love that Dune is grounded in science.
Yes.
And yes, it's sort of sci-fi science and science of the future, but like it really, you know, it grounds itself kind of what appears to be superpowers to us by our sort of human standards after 10,000 years of evolution, and then with the control they're exerting and then pushing the boundaries forward, they ground it, yes, in Dune science.
That's also just like a super badass backstory.
Yeah, for sure. She's very formidable. And I think what that means to our show is that Valia Harkonnen has incredible shoes to fill. And, you know, Rakella Berto-Anarul founded the Order, but she's not immortal. And at some point, she had to look to who she was going to pass this mission onto. So, yeah, she's a very huge figure in Valia Harkonnen's life.
So yeah, speaking of her mortality, on her deathbed, she's got a vision, which we see in the show. I think we should unpack it a little bit. We see the sisterhood school being eaten up by sandworms. We see burning skin, blood dripping across the floor, and 2 glowing blue eyes. And I would love to know, as much as you are able to talk about it, given spoilers and everything, how you chose those images and what Raquella thinks it all means.
Well, I mean, Raquella's having a moment of prescience on her deathbed, so she is glimpsing images of a future. So I wouldn't want to give away any spoilers, but I will tell you, like, they're not by accident.
Well, I guess it's worth asking, like, what is the significance for the Order? Is prescience and future sight something that they have dealt with before? Or is this, like, does it feel like prophecy and religious in any way? Or is it feeling like a science thing where, like, this is going to... I'm sure we'll answer some of these questions as time goes on, but I'm just curious, like, it's just such an interesting setup for people to interpret, because it's like the dying wish is complicated by this flash of a vision.
It is an interesting point that you bring up, because, like, 10,000 years later, around the story around Paul Atreides, prophecy comes to mean something else. I mean, it's a controlled narrative that they're using. And because we're telling a sort of a foundational story, the ability to do that has to come from somewhere. Some kind of event has to kind of spark that idea. So a real prophecy seems to be kind of a natural way to kind of start that, progression.
I agree. I mean, I think it's very much an inciting incident of Raquella's moment of prescience, and it is taking a notion that will become incredibly complicated in the world of Dune, right? Like, it's like, but is this a moment of truth? Is this this vision? But what is Valia going to learn by dealing with that prophecy and working against it, or working to grow the sisterhood so that it's prepared for this reckoning that's coming? And what is she going to learn in the process? And I think what Jordan's pointing to is, like, the sisterhood, which will eventually become the Bene Gesserit, which will actually eventually almost weaponize prophecy in the future. I don't think that's their only relationship to it. And we really wanted to start them somewhere different, somewhere grounded and in a sort of more pure place with it.
So, of course, we see a schism form. There's question of what should happen next. There are 2 factions of the sisterhood. One is led by Dorothea and one is led by Valia. Let's listen to a clip of their argument.
Why do you need access to the breeding index?
So I can return the sisterhood to its values.
You can't do this.
We are the hand that points toward a righteous path. We are meant to guide the Imperium, not rule it.
We must create the path and lead others to it. We're the only ones who can.
Ever since you arrived, you and your sister Tula, you've thought too highly of yourself.
Okay, so can we unpack a little bit? I mean, we've gotten some hints about what's really at the heart of this disagreement, but I think it's very interesting how differently each of them sees the purpose of the sisterhood.
Yes, and Dorothea, who is Raquella Berto Anarul's granddaughter, was very much the one who was, for a long time, I would say, Raquella would tell you that she was going to become the second Mother Superior. And she's really a formidable foundational sister for the Order, because I think it's fine to tell the audience at this point that she is the sister who actually, unlocked truth sense. So she is someone who did push the boundaries of what it means to be human forward. And the whole reason that the sisters can go out into the Imperium and function as human lie detectors really goes back to Dorothea. So she is a sister of great power, but she goes on a mission and hangs out with a group of anti-technology zealots that are referred to as the Butlerian movement. And she's kind of converted, and she comes back very much sharing their beliefs. And Raquella does not share those beliefs. So it's sort of, and here's Raquella feeling that the end of her life is coming. She needs to pass on her mission. She needs to pass on her great work. But the woman she thought she could hand it to would never guide it now, given her new belief system in the way that Raquella needs it to be guided. And one of the things we're going to explore this season is, like, how Valia came to the sisterhood and for Raquella offered a way out of an impasse. And so when we pick them up in the premiere and we're catching them after Raquella's death, you're seeing 2 women of great force who have opposing philosophies of what the role of the sisterhood is. and what means justify what ends.
Wow. I love this so much as somebody who is a failed scholar of religion. I just feel like there's so many ways in which you can see historical moments that this also, like the generation right after, like, not uncommon for them to be killing each other in the hopes of, trying to figure out what the pathway is. So it's really cool to see this like kind of alternative history. Let's talk about that scene where Valia kills Dorothea using the voice.
I will never bend to you, Valia Harkonnen.
Then take out your blade! Drive it into your throat!
I want to talk about that moment and how you thought the audience would react to it, because it is a very shocking thing, the way it happens. I heard "take out your blade" in the trailer, and yet I did not expect that moment at all, that Valia would use the voice to make Dorothea kill herself. What is the audience supposed to take from this about Valia? What kind of character is this?
I mean, it just really is a bold way to sort of, I think, to plant that first stake in the ground for the show, which is, this is Dune. This is the story of where the Bene Gesserit came from. And the voice is such an iconic power. And the fact that it was used within the sisterhood, sister to sister, in this kind of foundational crime that is, I think, has to be debated, as we get to know the story better. Was that the only way? That's something that we are really going to examine. And I don't think the answer is obvious given the stakes. Sometimes when you're operating, like Jordan said, on generations and also a sense of, if you cannot guide or set the path, like Valia is saying, and you backslide into a kind of war and tyranny and the amount of suffering, it starts to raise that question of, like, did this need to happen so that other suffering and death could be prevented? And also, I think it sort of plants it within the sisterhood, right? Like, the stakes of the macro, the universe is big, but also, it's also within this organization, and power is within this institution, and it's being fought within itself as well.
Whether Valia is a tragic hero or an anti-hero, I think we'll figure it out as we go along in our story. But, if we're treating her that way, the act of damnation that she commits happens in the first 5 minutes of the show is pretty amazing. I mean, when I first read what we were doing, to me, I was like, wow, that really pulls the rug out from under you, because now you don't know what to expect to this person. Is she a hero? Is she the villain? And then you realize that, again, like true to Dune, it's all morally ambiguous. And true to the Bene Gesserit, it's all about the shadows. And there's just, there's no light for morality to exist in there. And this moment really kind of signifies that. And also, just don't fuck with Valia Harkonnen.
Well, yes, obvious. That's very clear.
Yeah.
Speaking of the sisterhood and sort of the dual meanings that you're working within, especially this first episode, but I imagine the rest of the series as well, I would love to talk more too about Valia's sister Tula, who, it doesn't seem quite as stridently different as Dorothea and Valia's disagreement, but it's clear that they do still have a bit of friction, which is really interesting.
No, they do. I think some of it comes from their family and their past, which we're going to explore in the series. So I do think that they have tension they've carried with them.
Yeah. I also think it's fascinating that anytime you're telling a story where two characters are hand in hand as they trot off into the dark and get up to some questionable stuff, one of them has more awareness than the other, and that's your source of conflict.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that really interesting, because you would imagine one person with awareness has more guilt than the other, but sometimes it's not the truth. It's very fascinating how people deal with that knowledge of right or wrong, and or where they stand on the moral compass. It's a very layered relationship, and we kind of drafted it that way. So
yeah.
We have to make sure we talk about the royal wedding on Seleucus Secundus. We have the emperor, House Carino, Princess Inez getting married somewhat happily to the Richese boy Pruitt. He's 9. Not what I would have expected. So let's talk a little bit about this other messed up family we've got.
Yeah. Well, I love the Princess Inez and the notion that she very much is experiencing the desire to shape her own path. And that is been a lifelong dream to go study at the sisterhood. She's been in the orbit of Kasha, who is her father's truthsayer, but somebody who was a figure who we're going to learn about Inez's past and understand that the sisterhood really played a key role in it in the future. But Kasha is a very important person to her, and in some ways, somebody she idealizes and has looked up to. And so I think Inez thinks that marrying a 9-year-old kid, if it gives her years of freedom until he comes of age and she gets to go study at the sisterhood, by the time she returns to take the throne, she will be her own truthsayer. And she longs for that control. I think she feels like her position makes her vulnerable and that she wants to shore herself up and be a formidable empress someday. It's kind of a great plan that's very close to happening. They almost have her. And of course, in any good premiere, things don't work out exactly as planned.
Yeah, no. Desmond. Although the meeting the sisterhood, the show is also kind of getting behind the scenes of the imperial family, and I think one of the interesting aspects about the imperial family is that the fact that this engagement has to happen means how tenuous their power really is. They have to do things to shore up spice, production. They're kind of, I wouldn't say they're at the whim of the great houses, but they are not lording over anything in a total, power position. So, the fact that she has to marry, and a very independent, strong-minded person has to be married to a 9-year-old kid to shore up this relationship is, it shows you the kind of power dynamics in this kind of interstellar feudal society.
So yeah, Jordan, you mentioned Desmond. He's sort of our mysterious stranger who comes to town, and he tells a story about surviving disaster on Arrakis. And Sister Kasha, who advises House Carino, uses her truth-saying abilities and essentially says, what he's saying is either true or at least he believes it to be true. This is such an interesting introduction to a new character. I would love to know how you decided to start there with him, and even how you talked to the actor who plays Desmond about his character and how you wanted him to carry himself in this first scene we see him.
Desmond Hart is about telling the truth. He kind of weaponizes the truth. He's very out in the open, and sometimes the truth is a sharp edge that a lot of people can't take. And I think he wields it like a sword. Now, I think he's telling the truth, but, there's a very strong omission there. So I don't know if that qualifies as a lie or not. There's a part of the story that he's not telling that we find out later in the episode. And I think that Travis Fimmel, his way of approaching that story is to be authentic in believing everything that Desmond says. At the same time, he's very good about keeping all of his cards close to the vest, because what I love about that scene in particular is he says what he has to say. He warns the emperor of this insurgency that the emperor didn't know about. The emperor invites him to stay. They walk out together. He turns around and he stares at Kasha, who's, feeling something's not right. And the face that he flashes at her is both feels like a sneer, but also sort of innocent, but also sort of curious. I mean, there's so many emotions you can read from there. I mean, obviously, you're getting some weird vibes from him, clearly. So the way Travis is always playing is that you're always supposed to be, on your toes and not understand what's going on there. He keeps you just off kilter. And, ultimately, that's what makes him an interesting Rasputin-like character. You know what I mean? Is he...
Rasputin, of course, he's Rasputin. Yeah. I totally see it.
And I think that's very fitting for Dune because it's all about, prophets and fake prophets and,
Yes.
Right. I want to talk as a viewer, just like how we experienced it as we're getting to the end of the episode here. Like me and Greta talked about how we saw him as kind of a rogue, maybe like a Duncan Idaho type. And I was also expecting Pruitt Richese to be a long line of, terrible child emperors you love to hate. And then this poor child is at the very end here, see him burning to death, suffering, not even dying in a quick way. He's suffering through that death. And on the other hand, we have Kasha. Kasha is also dying a very similar death on the Sisterhood planet. Let's talk about that finale. Like, it really subverted a lot of my expectations of what I thought was going to happen. He kind of becomes this prophet figure. Like, it was there, but I just didn't expect it at that moment. And like, what does it say about what Desmond wants and what he's capable of?
I do want to it's such so many good questions. I do want to say that the actor who played, no, it's fantastic. One of the things we're so blessed by is, right, we just are so blown away by the cast we've assembled. And
yes,
but we've had just tremendous fortune of having, guest cast come on. And even if they're playing a limited role, and Charlie Hodson Pryor, who plays Pruitt, just came and just killed it. Like, and so much to put on a kid's
so good
shoulders. And, not only was like acting in scenes with like hundreds of extras, but also like toe to toe with Travis Fimmel and like
that was his first day of shooting.
That scene you're talking about, unbelievable. So I just want to give
that was first.
Yes,
that was first.
So anyway, we felt incredibly blessed with that, and I love Pruitt. I mean, like, again, sort of like the opening, letting you know that, like, we're not going to pull any punches. Like, it's sort of like, and Desmond did right away is like, he does carry with him in tremendous force and also tremendous mystery.
And charm.
And charisma.
We were charmed by him. We we were like, what is he going to do? Not murder a kid was not what I was expecting.
He looks so heartbroken when he does it. And, I have to hand it to Travis for that.
One of the things that I got really excited about, his wardrobe, Desmond's wardrobe, that trench coat, is, to me as a film fan, reminds me of all the trench coats of the cowboys in Once Upon a Time in the West when they're waiting for Charlie Bronson at the train station. And like, it's just so like when we see him walking into the palace, he's got this unfurled coat. We're behind him. We're told that he's a hero. We're told that he's a survivor. He's telling the story about some rebel attack. I mean, all these things are like, he's got a weird vibe. Travis is doing it in a weird vibe.
Yeah.
But it's generally you're checking in the good category. Like, I could trust this guy. You know what I mean? And then it's at the end, just like does the most ghastly thing. And he just burns like, a kid in front of you. And it's just like, whoa.
And suddenly the sisters, like, you're like, oh, they have a very formidable adversary. And everybody's willing to go to great lengths. So what's going to go down?
It's so interesting because I think as an actor, and because the way that character is written even already, I'm still sort of like, well, but he must have some end in mind to justify this horrible behavior. Like, it doesn't seem like he is reveling in killing this kid.
No. And I don't think, by the way, I do want to say, I don't think Valia was reveling in killing Dorothea. Like, I think these are
that's also
people who have bigger, larger, like you said, drives and goals and feel the stakes are high enough that they'll go to great lengths. But I think both of them are doing what they perceive they need to be doing.
Well, the words are important here, right? Because he tells the kid before he kills him that his death is a sacrifice. Not a murder.
Yes.
Yes. So, I said murder because that's how I saw it.
Yeah.
He saw it as a sacrifice.
Yeah, not inaccurate.
So, in Desmond's eyes, this is for the greater good. And this begins the first game within a game.
Well, it was an action-packed premiere, and we can't wait to keep watching more episodes. And thank you so much for helping unpack it with us. This was such a pleasure, Allison and Jordan. Y'all are the best.
Oh, total
Thank you
pleasure.
very much.
And now, to get into this premiere even more, we are thrilled to welcome Valya Harkonnen herself to the pod. Emily Watson, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, hello.
I would love to start by asking what your relationship to Dune was like before taking on this project.
Virginal, I'd say, is my answer. Well, I'd seen the first Villeneuve movie,
Okay.
but apart from that, I didn't really know very much, and I'm actually quite glad I didn't, because there's a very intimidating public ownership of the of the universe of it, and a very clear sense of people's right and the wrong way to do this. And there's the Lynchian mob, and there's the Villeneuvians, and there's there's factions, and everybody wants to see different things represented. So I just kind of started chewing into the scripts, and we went on a very steep learning curve with Alison and Jordan about who was who and what was what and what had happened and who'd done what to who.
It is a formidable fandom, for sure.
I've been to Comic-Con. I am never the same.
I am well aware.
The terror of Comic-Con. Amazing. What did you realize when you went to Comic-Con, or when you have been exposed to this new fandom? Like, have you seen the fan base and the impact on pop culture? What do you think of it as somebody who is not in that world before this?
Well, just the passion involved is phenomenal. And how strongly people feel about it, but also how many people for whom it was reading the book, the first book, was a formative experience and kind of, set their imagination on fire and got them into sci-fi and got them into that sense of the world of literature and the imagination, investigating just kind of everything.
It is really interesting to think about, from your point of view, bringing your own sensibility to this role, especially as a Harkonnen, which is, a very well-known and, often sort of reviled character, at least in the original Dune book and movies. It makes sense to me that, it seems like there would be a lot of strengths for you kind of coming in fresh, as opposed to bringing all of that potential baggage with you.
And also, I'm kind of really quite out of my lane now. I don't think I'm known for my work in the world of science fiction. So, but it's the same skill set, really. But yeah, it's, there was a very chewy lot of things to get into as an actor, and it's, you just start investigating and finding all the things that make it feel real, I guess.
As you said, like, Dune is still very much grounded in relationships and people. Obviously, one of the core relationships here is your on-screen chemistry with Olivia Williams, who plays your sister Tula.
Am I allowed to swear?
Yes.
I believe so,
we
yes.
are a very fucked up family. Really.
Yeah.
We've got a lot of issues, a lot of anger. Yeah. But it starts with a lie that the Atreides clan told about us, that we were traitors, that we were cowards in the Battle of Corrin, which is a lie. And it is.
I know.
We were banished.
I know it is. I'm sorry to laugh. I just think it's really funny. Like, you are stating your position, and I respect it.
So we get banished to this awful, terrible, frost-bitten, god-awful place in, the back of the end of the universe, and it's a stinging, humiliating place to be for someone who is very powerful and ambitious as a young woman, and has a very strong sense of injustice and rage.
Well, I would love to talk more about your relationship with, your character's relationship with Tula, and also your relationship with Olivia, because it does seem like, obviously, there are tensions between you two as literal sisters in this world. But you also do still, I don't know, do you trust each other? It seems like you respect each other, at least.
Yeah, I think it's complicated, as all relationships with sisters are. I mean, we have, first of all, not, only a few of them you know about so far, but we have a lot of very deep, dark secrets to keep. And that keeps us close. And we have that, Valia is a natural leader. She's very straightforward in a way. She doesn't feel she needs to enter into any kind of social contract with anybody unless she wants something from them. She's like a slightly psychopathic, really. She's a bit of a shark. I sort of quote this as a way to understanding Valia, that when a human being is born, it takes at least 6 months before they can move from the spot without help, and they have to form relationships with the people who are caring for them, and that's how we get a society. That's how everything happens. A shark abandons its young within seconds. Wow. And I think there's a sort of cold, dead-eyed part of Valia that's just because she's several steps ahead,
right,
all the time, really, really smart, and can see, she's been selected by a charismatic leader and been told you're the one, you're the chosen one, you are powerful, you're talented, and that's a very dangerous thing to do to a young person. And she believes the end justifies the means. Her sister is, to her, a loyal follower. Tula is absolutely uses social interaction to achieve her ends. She's very warm and she's very nice and loving. But
she seems more emotional too.
She's more emotional, and possibly that's more dangerous.
I guess let's talk about, do they see each other as tools, or is there like genuine affection or, connection to them that beyond their both being sisters in this thing that they both believe in, that the non-sisterhood, meaning like the Bene Gesserit versus their own sisterhood? Like, can you talk about
there is a very strong familial bond, and what drives a lot of what they do is that sense of vengeance for their family. Mm-hmm. They do love each other. They would sacrifice everything for each other, but at the same time, they irritate the shit out of each other, I think.
Siblings, yeah.
Sibling, yeah. I mean, it's an untapped. You could power the planet with Sybil Rivingery. The power of it. It's such a force. And Tula's definitely got younger sister syndrome. She's always in her sister's shadow, and Valia doesn't really care whether, she doesn't care for that. She's like, it's not important. We just got to get on with the job.
So you talked about how Valia is 3 steps ahead. She clearly has a well-defined path that she sees as being correct for the sisterhood.
Yeah.
Can you describe from your perspective what that vision is?
Well, at the beginning of the series, we see the plan coming to fruition. The sisterhood are poised to have the kind of piece of the puzzle fall into place that will set them on the right path, set everything fair. When Princess Inez is betrothed to Pruitt Richese, it's not just a marriage that is good for the Corrinos because they get all the spaceships and protect Arrakis. That's, from Corrino's point of view, that's a good thing. But what it actually is that the breeding index has told them that marriage will produce strong leaders. But also Pruitt, because Pruitt is underage, he's only 9 when they get engaged. Nice. There will be many years before he comes of age, while Inez can come over to our planet and start training as a sister. And so when she then ascends the throne, she will be a powerful sister, running the universe. And that's our plan. And it's all for the good of humankind and peace and prosperity, you understand.
I love the way you say that, because it's so much more complicated than that, though, obviously, right?
Yes. I mean, I think she can't help herself, that the drive within her of the rage and the fury she's got other agendas going on. I mean, when we first, I don't know if you've spoken to Olivia yet, but when we first met for this, we get down to that. We met back in the 1990s at the Royal Shakespeare Company. That's where we first met. But when we first met up to, getting ready for this, we went and sat in the National Portrait Gallery in London and sat in front of the portrait of Elizabeth I and all those Tudor women, Bloody Mary, Mary Queen of Scots, all those women who were, either people wanted to marry them or kill them, and they were very loving relationships that ended in beheading, and that very, very sense of people who are incredibly powerful, very paranoid, have to have a sort of poker face because they can't give anything away. But it's cold, quiet power, and it was a police state. They controlled the narrative. We here in this country, we have an image of Elizabeth I as a Renaissance golden. It was a golden age, the Elizabethan age, and in fact, that's probably the result of the very successful PR machine of the day. And in fact, it was pretty terrifying time to be alive. And what is a really interesting parallel, I think, with these women is that it was about control of the narrative, controlling the PR, controlling communications between everybody, and knowing exactly who was where and who was talking to who. And that's what the sisterhood do, is they ostensibly provide a service to mankind in that they are truth sayers. They can, say, well, that guy's lying, that one guy's telling the truth. But actually it becomes a commodity and they employ the dark arts. As you see in that scene where Carino is negotiating and the two women are just sort of doing the finger talking and saying, well, we'll deal with that later. You make him do this and I'll make him do that.
Yes. Right. That was a really indicative scene because it was like, this isn't about what he wants as much as it's about what they can manage.
The sisterhood agenda is much more important than any of the players that they're supposedly supporting.
Right. So we have to ask you about the voice, because it's like the signature ability of the sisterhood. In this episode, we see a young Valia kill Dorothea using the voice. Young Valia says it's something she's been working on.
Yeah.
I want to hear about, well, first of all, your performance of the voice when we get that. And also, what do you imagine was the origin of this ability?
Well, I think this is one of the kind of really interesting things about Brian Herbert's idea of what the Bene Gesserit are, and that after the machine wars, humankind has survived just and defeated AI, and they now they're kind of driven to develop themselves in ways that makes them much more powerful, much more able to achieve things, much more strong and defendable in and of themselves, not relying on machines, not relying on outside forces. And so there are all these different. You don't see much of this in this series, but there are all these different factions. But the sisterhood have these powers, one of which is to hack their own biology, and it's kind of pseudo-scientific basis in stuff that we're learning about now, is that your emotions are in fact governed by your gut, by your biology, and they have this power to go inside their DNA, change their molecular setup in some way, and access their ancestors, their female ancestors, inside their DNA. To me, I think it's like if you saw a toddler standing at the top of the stairs or about to run into the road, the voice that will stop them in their tracks. That's what it is. It's utter command, utter assurance inside their head and make them stop. Obviously, I kind of work with a voice coach a bit to sort of find a resonance in my own voice, but also then it's amplified in the studio, and they mess around with it and do all sorts of things. And we spent quite a fun afternoon kind of doing
is that
kind of noises.
Is that commanding a toddler idea? Is that the mental place you have to go to perform the voice?
I think it's more just being very resonantly planted in your body and using sound like a weapon. Like if I was a laser beam of sound, that's what I am.
Very much in line with Herbert.
Well, before we let you go, I wonder if there's anything else about your character that viewers may not know yet that's not particularly spoilery, but maybe an insight that you can bring to Valia as we move forward.
I think she is very rattled by the end of episode 1. Well, obviously, I mean, it's a devastating. Kasha is one of the founding, there were 5 of them and they did it together kind of thing. And is one of her oldest associates and friends. And it's devastating that Kasha has died. But it's also, this is the reckoning. This is the reckoning that Mother Raquel said, you will be the one to see it. And here it is, she sees it. There are many layers to this that we have not yet begun to fathom.
Emily, thank you so much for joining us, and congratulations on a wonderful premiere. I genuinely can't stop thinking about it, and I'm excited to see more.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
That's all for this week. We'll be back next Sunday night with more special guests to break down the second episode of Dune Prophecy, which you can watch on HBO or stream exclusively on Max.
Be sure to subscribe to the podcast so you do not miss an episode. And if you like what you are hearing, don't forget to leave a rating and review on your podcast player of choice. You can also find us on the Dune Prophecy social media handles.
The official Dune Prophecy podcast is produced by HBO in collaboration with Pineapple Street Studios. I'm Amadal Yakbar. Follow me on social at RadBrownDads.
And I'm Greta Johnson. You can follow me at Greta M. Johnson. Our executive producers for Pineapple Street are Gabrielle Lewis, Jay-Ann Barry, and Barry Finkel. Our lead engineer for the show is Hannes Brown. Pineapple's head of sound and engineering is Raj Makija. Pineapple's senior audio engineers are Marina Pais and Pedro Alvira. This episode is mixed by Hannes Brown.
Our editor is Darby Maloney, and our producers are Ben Goldberg and Melissa Akiko Slaughter.
Special thanks to Becky Rowe, Allison Cohen, and Aaron Kelly from the Max podcast team.
Thanks for listening. See you next week.
Humility is the foundation of our virtues.
Humility is the foundation of our virtues.
The mind of man is holy.
The mind of man is holy.
Thou shalt not disfigure the soul.
Thou shalt not disfigure the soul.